Salutations, respective viewers. I'm George from Ireland. This video is about how Ben Shapiro dupes people. So he's known for his copious speeches and he's had ample practice at public speaking. He's got many tricks up his sleeve. His best known bon mot is that facts don't care about your feelings. Well, he has a reputation for possessing a razor-sharp intellect. He's very belligerent, and that impresses many people. He blinds with speed. Many people mistake speed for logic or articulacy. Remember how so many people judge by first impressions, which is why they judge by this appearance of mastery, as in he speaks very quickly. And they're subconsciously convinced by him because he's convincing himself. I think that's the process. It's not really at a conscious logical level of figuring out, does this argument hold water? But as this chap seems to be in charge and appears to utterly believe it himself, well, he must be speaking the truth. I think it was Nietzsche who said, people believe in what is seen to be strongly believed in. That will sway them. Now, someone like me, I'm too mild-mannered, even-handed. I offer deeper explanations, and that's something which takes time. I offer reservations, and I recognise merit on the opposing side. And so that doesn't win people over so effectively, just because I'm more moderate and restrained in what I say in my style. But with Mr. Shapiro, there are no holds barred. He uses multiple logical fallacies to persuade people, and these are not so apparent to the untrained mind. He often dissembles. Now, some of what he says is veridic. He speaks very rapidly, as I pointed out, but there's clarity to his diction. He enunciates properly, but I think he does not wish to be comprehended. Not at a profound level. People will understand the literal signification of his words. He doesn't allow his audience time to ruminate on his words, because if they did digest them, they might perceive some of the flaws in the logic. So he seeks to obscure rather than to enlighten. He's enthralling to watch because he's so high energy. He's self-possessed, and of course that makes a lot of people think that he must be correct. So he has aptitude as a rhetor, no one can doubt that. And he's hailed as a latter-day quintillion. So you may have heard of Quintilian's book. Well, the title is usually translated The Education of an Orator. Quintilian wrote that to be a good rhetorician, one must first of all be a good person. Now, the thing about Mr. Shapiro is he thrills in demeaning his interlocutors. And I don't think that is seemly. I think it's becoming to treat them with a modicum of respect and show some common decency like that. But Mr. Shapiro, well, he has his values, and I don't think there's any doubt that he's a faithful spouse. In that case, that way you might say he is a good person, an unimpeachable family man. So I think there he practices what he preaches. But he's not especially eloquent. He's not oratant. Though he's pleasingly free of bombast when he speaks, and he doesn't resort to sesquipedalian words, the sort of thing that his audience would find off-putting. It would irk them if they were left feeling dim. So in that sense, he doesn't challenge them. He speaks plainly, and then people think he is a fearless truth-teller. It doesn't come across as evasive or go in for circumlocution, or what's the other word? Convoluted arguments. Sometimes, though, I do feel he's going a bit away from the topic, like on climate change. This is an issue on which he acknowledges he doesn't feel very well versed. Now, I know, although I dislike him, and I strenuously disagree with much of what he says, he should certainly be allowed to say his piece. And it's emetic that some people try to prevent him speaking to college audiences, protesters, or saying that he shouldn't be allowed to publish his articles. No, that's preposterous. Of course he's entitled to say what he thinks, and it's absolutely right that he should be given an opportunity to do that. So Mr. Shapiro, he's skilled in the dark arts of gunning an audience. Now, I know he's not the only one. Some of his opponents, the leftists, would do the same. His voice is not euphonious, which one might have thought would be a distinct disadvantage. It grates on my ears, certainly, but it's still listenable. Grinds my gears, the whining tone and so on. But nevertheless, he still has a huge audience. He delivers his orations at the top of his voice. Now, there's not much of a need for voice projection these days because obviously we've got sound systems. In a previous generation, when people had to address a crowded hall of 1,000 or more, that would have been a different story. But Mr. Shapiro, he speaks for the YouTube generation. They want sound bites. They want to see people owned. And people under 30 have been conditioned to have the concentration span of a mayfly because we've got so many television channels and obviously the internet and things on your phone. Apps have we've got colour, movement, change, got to be constantly updated, got to be constantly stimulated, and therefore we can't pay attention very long. So a civilized debate would be too restrained and too mannerly. That wouldn't be satisfying for a lot of people. They want to see somebody pummeled into submission. So gentlemanly conduct is too bland. So Mr. Shapiro appears to understand all this, and that's why he pitches his speeches right for his audience. His viewership do not want to hear things which go over their heads. They don't want terms which need too much explanation. So they want things reasonably simplistic, and I think that's something he does a lot. He oversimplifies to a dangerous degree. The trouble is the truth is often highly complex and it would take too long to explain it properly. Now he lists factors, which is also an effective tactic, saying we can't have public funded healthcare because in healthcare, well, there are three things that you can have, but you can only have two of the three maximum. You can have affordability, you can have universality, or you can have quality. Now, I take issue with his summary of the situation, but by listing them, that was helpful for people to understand these things, rather than just delving into it and not separating out the three issues. His fans want to see their opponents bested, and Mr. Shapiro does not often appear to come off second best. So they want to feel there's a victory. They don't want to learn something like that. Now, his opponents would also be the same. Some liberal left people want to see their opponents demolished, but somehow the right wing in the United States come across as more aggressive, have a more macho attitude, think that this really is a battle. It's not about persuading people and getting them to see the light. No, it's by absolutely crushing them into the soil. So Mr. Shapiro's success in monetizing condescension is awe-striking because he often comes across as sneering at his audience, and he really is a genius, having invented a way to make millions by being smug. I would have thought that being so snide and caustic in his comments would rub people up the wrong way, but no, he's raking in the cash, and these cutting comments, they just delight his audience. There'll be plenty of verbal pyrotechnics, so he's a showman. He's got a sense of timing. Now, Mr. Shapiro is thought to be the consummate debater, as I said, partly because he's so self-assured and because he has met with so many successes and achieved so many plaudits that, yeah, he has reason to be confident going into these things, and his hyper-aggressive style has worked for him. Trouble is, one should be a bit more magnanimous, because if it goes wrong, it'd be all the more humiliating for him. But as I said, he's scathing towards his opponents, and that goes down a storm in the United States, where being tough is exalted as a supreme virtue. But there's no need to be scornful or unchivalrous of people that one happens not to agree with. I think it would be just to be more productive to have a discussion, in a sense, rather than an argument, not to be too oppositional, and not to have a mindless big tent otherwise, not to pretend that we see eye to eye when we don't, but it would just be more constructive to have an exchange of views. And one can have a debate without it being too belligerent like that. Now, he riposts with aplomb whenever people are attacking his position. He knows that sometimes to do so, he needs to change the subject when he senses he's not on firm ground. So say what else you like about Mr. Shapiro, but he is no fool. And he presumably recognizes that some of what he says consists of formal fallacies and informal fallacies and other fallacies. But it's easy to sway crowds like this. and sometimes I've done this, I've been surprised by how easily people fall for bunkum because their critical faculties are not highly developed. You tell them what they wish to hear. There are some reliable applause lines, and you can just win people over with faulty reasoning. People don't necessarily have time or the cognitive skills to figure out that what you're saying isn't cogent. So Mr. Shapiro has been doing this for years. He started off as a debating wunderkind. And he contends that the federal government and the state governments should do nothing about privation. And he suggests that some notions cannot be opposed, that, Israel should be a Jewish state and the United States should back it to the hilt. Well, odd. I mean, obviously I want Jewish people to be safe. It could be Israel, could be elsewhere. But that you could say, oh, it's unique, has to be treated differently. Well, I mean, every nation is unique. But then if it's not too much of a contradiction in terms, all countries have got a few things in common. So, it's to say that Algeria should be treated completely differently because, well, it's the only Algerian country in the world. All right, I know they don't have a religion that's unique to that. Judaism is unique to Israel. I know it's the only Jewish majority country in the world, but that's because so few people are Jewish, and on and on. So he denounces the wickedness of poverty reduction programs in the United States, but never breathes a word against Israel for doing what he would call socialism in the United States. And to him, socialism seems to be the sum of all evils. And he holds up benefiting Israel as a moral imperative. And he never tires of reminding his audience that he's Jewish, and presumably he's got some fellow feeling for Israel. Certainly appears very deeply emotionally attached to Israel. But it casts a pall of doubt over his sincerity that he should fulminate against welfare programs in the United States, but never breathe a word about them in Israel. Then again, he might say, well, he's not an Israeli citizen. I don't think he is. So therefore, the domestic politics of Israel are not his affair. It's not his business to go speaking about that. He shan't poke his nose in these internal matters. It's just the existence of Israel per se. Now, but Israeli defense, is that an internal issue? I don't know. He certainly talks about that one. Now, he worked for Breitbart several years ago, and it's well known that this was the nexus of white nationalism in the United States at the time. Now, white nationalism, that blurs into white supremacism. Now, it's questionable whether Breitbart was anti-Semitic. It did publish some pro-Israel pieces, but it also attracted anti-Semites. So he had this dubious dalliance with white nationalists, which I think calls into question his integrity. He's always saying that there is no white privilege, which plays very well with white audiences on the whole. And here I partially concur with him. I think the whole white privilege thing has been overdone. But it's beyond argument that anti-black prejudice exists in the United States. It's more prevalent than anti-white prejudice, partly because there are more white people to be prejudiced against black people. Now, not every white American is anti-black, probably not even most. So, whites having most of the wealth, more than 65% of the population, rather more than 65% of the wealth, much more than 65% of the political offices and so on, it's very difficult to sustain the argument that anti-white prejudice is severe. I know Mr. Shapiro doesn't particularly talk about that, but as there is a lot of anti-black prejudice, and black people obviously suffer from that, and there's relatively little anti-white prejudice, you can see why African Americans feel aggrieved. What should be done about it? Well, that's a matter for another video. But Mr. Shapiro seems to think nothing. The free market will all put it right. Wonder why it hasn't not put it right in so long. So he's completely against reparations for slavery. Actually, I agree with him. I mean, not on a governmental level. If people want to do it privately, that's fine, or companies and so on. But he certainly wants reparations for the Holocaust. Well, it's incontestable that the Holocaust happened. I met a survivor, a Moldovan Canadian. Anyway, the survivors were slaves, so in a sense they were compensated for their slavery, sometimes for the murder of their relatives. So he wants reparations for slavery for his ethno-religious group. Admittedly, it's a bit different because that's within living memory. But it's beyond argument that the US has more gun deaths than other comparable rich lands which have gun control. And this is an issue where he seems to be irrational, saying, oh no, we must never have gun control because that would be disastrous. So this is an example of where he's a bit illogical. The jury is still out on whether concealed carry helps reduce gun crime or not. And I don't think he's got such a clear position on that. But surely he shouldn't be against concealed carry, because obviously that would be a restriction on the right to bear arms. And the Constitution, which he thinks is Holy Writ, says that there should be this right shall not be abridged, as there should be no limitations. No limitations at all. It's very plain. No limitations. Now, the whole concealed carry thing is a bit of a distraction of whether there should be proper gun control or not. And we can debate what a military-grade weapon is. It's a moot point exactly what counts as one. I don't wish to get mired in technical detail, and I know precious little about firearms. But he doesn't want those ones restricted at all. He's not an absolutist on the gun control issue. Would agree to some restriction. But, of course, isn't that the thin end of the wedge? This is like the exception that proves the rule, because if you are going to say that gun rights should be abridged, then surely you can't think that Second Amendment really is sacrosanct. You've already started to intrude in it. I'm glad he started to intrude in it. I'd just like him to go further. Come on to another bugbear of his, climate change. Now, it's not debatable that it's happening. He's even said so. But then in another video, he said, well, it hasn't happened for 15 years. Now, well, some would even dispute that climate change is happening at all. I know it's not debatable, but some people will say things which are absolutely ludicrous and provably bogus, like, the flat earthers, or that there was no evolution, or things like that. It's been likened to Holocaust denial. Now, he finds that offensive, but I don't think the comparison is that different. I mean, I know obviously climate change isn't by human malice. It's not mass murder, but where these two things can be likened to each other is the Holocaust most definitely happened, and that's proven irrefragably. That's that. It's a fact. And yet, despite the absolute mountain of incontrovertible evidence, some people will stonewall and say that it's not true. Anyway, so coming back to climate change, it is man-made. To what extent? Now, that's a little bit debatable. I'm not a scientist, you can possibly tell. So he tries to go in the gaps and cast doubt and quibble about that bit. All right, to some extent, that's a fair point. We're not quite sure maybe exactly how much there is, how much of it is man-made and how much of it is natural. But there's no doubt that at least some of it is anthropogenic. So he wants to wait for the verdict on climate change, or what's it going to do in the next few decades. By then it might be too late, even if it's not quite too late. The deleterious effects of climate change will have gone rather further. So we should do something now. Now, I know a lot about these issues like poverty reduction and climate change. I should put my money where my mouth is. I'm not known for my liberality towards the needy. And as for climate change, I could do my bit. When I return to Ireland, I don't swim there. I fly. If I really wanted to reduce climate change and carbon emissions, I would obviously have to fly less. But because most people are like me, a bit selfish and irresponsible, that's why governments need to step in. I think he's not thought-provoking. He's maybe quite predictable along small c conservative lines, what counts as conservative in the United States. And he often misdirects by talking about the evils of the left, and really trying to frame everything as a left-right battle. The left thinks this on same-sex marriage or climate change. Well, climate change is obviously a matter of ecology. It's, do you care about the ecosystem or do you not? Now, I know the choices are completely binary. There are various levels of caring about it. You could care about, you could care about saving the rainforest and not about carbon emissions so much that the two are a little bit related. You could care about saving rhinos from extinction, but not care about climate change as such. So, okay, there are many different issues within that. But you could be a left-winger who doesn't care about climate change and is a big polluter. Or you could be a right-winger who does, and there are right-wingers who have cared about it, like, say, Ben Goldsmith, a Conservative MP in the UK. Because he knows if he turns it into some sort of ideological issue or what with partisan issue, left versus right, a lot of his more closed-minded right-wing supporters will say, that's it, this is my team. And they'll simply shut out any evidence from the other side, even when it's an irrefragable principle of science that more carbon emissions leads to global warming. So he's magisterial in changing the subject when